Good morning, everybody. I just want to welcome you all to this Lutherans for Life event. It's so lovely to see all of you here. It's just a joy to be here and to welcome you all. I'm the president of the Lutherans for Life Lifelines that meets here in Waconia, and I have my workers here with me, or the rest of my team. I have Gerda, and I have Carolyn Durbin and Marla Good, and Stephanie's in the back making coffee, and Helen Bungie is here, and Carolyn Bisey is here somewhere. I know she's here also. So we are the team that works to do the Lutherans for Life, and it's just great to have this event where we have Pastor Hinz coming to speak to us. To begin, I'd like to introduce Pastor Brian Stecker. He's been a pastor here at Trinity for 2.5 years, and he will do the opening prayer.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for all the work you do. Definitely the local work makes a huge difference across the country, so thank you to all of you. All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering us here. We thank you for Pastor Hinz and for the message that he's going to deliver today. We thank you that there are many people speaking across the country, and particularly around this time. We ask that you be with our country, Lord. We ask that you be with the unborn. They have no voice to cry out, and you have given us the duty to cry out and speak on their behalf. So please give us, the church, Christians, courage to stand up for them, to defend them in every way that we can, both in legislation and in our personal lives. And we ask that you would bring healing to anyone that has been hurt by the horrors of abortion, and that your light would shine into this darkened area. We give you praise because we know that your will be done, and that the gates of hell will not overcome your goodness and your victory. And in that, we give you thanks and praise, and in your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
He's not ketchup. He's not ketchup, it's Hinz, or Hinz.
Thank you, Pastor Stecker. It was nice to have you say the prayer. Next, I'd like to introduce Virginia Flo. She is the Director of Volunteer Relations for Lutherans for Life, and she has a little word to say also.
Thank you, Corey. It's wonderful to be here. I've been at several of your events out here. You have just a wonderful organization working in this part of the area with our LFL Lifelines, who, by the way, I think have been around for about over 35 years. So they've been with us. Maybe it's more like 39 now, I don't know. They've been with Lutherans for Life from the start. I am with the national organization. As volunteer relations, we are responsible for working with congregations, with life teams, life chapters, life advocates. There's 3 different ways that you can serve in your congregation, and it only takes 1. So if you want to do that in your church, if you're not part of our group here with our LFL Lifelines, they're certainly open to taking more members of their group, and you can do some more work locally if you want. Michelle Hartshorn is a new employee of Lutherans for Life. She started in November, and she's also, both of us happen to live in Minnesota, so you get a little extra special treatment because we are responsible for the whole country. But she lives in Lakeville, goes to Messiah Lutheran there. I live in Eagan, and I go to Trinity Lone Oak. Lutherans for Life's mission is to equip Lutherans and their neighbors to be gospel-motivated voices for life. We are an organization that uses scripture to educate people on the life issues, and it's really important that our congregations stay on top of what that is. Pastor, I can't even speak highly enough about Pastor Hinz. We've had him at our national conferences to speak. He's just a wealth of information and has a passion for life and all the other associated issues. So our job is not to change the laws that are out there, even though we would like them to not be what some of them are right now. Our job is to work in trying to express what God's Word says so that we change hearts. We want to make abortion unthinkable. We want to make assisted suicide unthinkable, so that even if the law says you can do these things, we don't. So, I'm not going to go into any more, even though that's what we do. I'm going to turn it back to Corey. Thank you. And thank you, the ladies of Lifelines. You're wonderful.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you for all the support you have always given us as our little group. We sometimes get frustrated, but Virginia's always there to hold us up and make us happy with our jobs. So now I'd like to have a very special opportunity to introduce Pastor Hinz. I just don't envy him his job at all, because I think it's a very, very difficult job. When I just read some of the things that he posts, it makes me glad that I'm not in his shoes. But we're very lucky to have him here today, and we're excited to hear his message. He serves as the public policy advocate for both the Minnesota North and South districts of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. As such, he represents the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in matters pertaining to life issues, abortion, and doctor-assisted suicide, issues related to marriage, family, and sexuality, and issues related to religious freedom, including parental choice in education. A graduate of this very church, Trinity Lutheran of Waconia, Mare Lutheran High School, Concordia University, Nebraska, and Chicago State University, and Luther Northwestern Seminary. He's a very smart man.
There are people, a lot of people here. We might have an argument.
Well, from my outlook, I will say. Pastor Hinz has taught biological science at both the high school and college levels, owned and operated retail shoe stores, and served as a parish pastor in St. James, Minnesota, and Gaylord, Minnesota. I believe that's where he still resides. In addition to active engagement in the public policy matters of the Synod, Pastor Hinz also advocates for the advancement of intelligent design theory. Pastor and his wife, Rachel, who is here also, have been married 46 years. Together they have 3 married children who have so far given them 12 grandchildren. Thank you, Pastor, for being here, and welcome.
Well, I have to tell you, this is probably as an intimidating an audience as I have ever faced. Largely because there are so many here that know me from way, way back. Yes, ma'am.
I think I saw you on TV news last night. Is that
You may have.
Channel 9?
Really? I didn't see
Right
that.
down there in the corner.
Yeah.
We're at the Capitol?
Yeah.
That's what they were talking about.
Yeah, there's stuff going on down there, even before they're in session. So, related to Kenny's little comment there about the ketchup, I do have to tell you that when our son was in high school and playing football, his request was to get the number 57. Hey, we have lots of fun with that. All right, so my intention is to break this presentation down into 3 parts. We will take a break at about 11 o'clock, so you can factor that into your plans here. The first thing I'd like to do, even though this is sponsored by the Carver County Lifelines, or I'm not sure if that's the correct term anymore. And I do intend to speak specifically about the life issues. I think it's also important that you understand that this issue, the life issues, abortion, assisted suicide, fit into a much broader context. And in order to understand the specific issue of life and all the controversy around that, you have to see the bigger picture. So we'll spend a little time doing that. Then we'll take time looking specifically at the life issues, abortion and assisted suicide, see what kind of developments there have been nationally, but primarily within the state of Minnesota over the last year and a half, especially. And then the last portion of it, I'd like to focus on the topic of education, because it is so vital. Many of the things that we are so shocked at in our culture come as a result of the fact that particularly the public education system is not a system that forms people able to think well and able to be critical, think in critical terms of what's going on around them. And so we need to address that and to do so and point in a direction where there is hope. And in fact, there is a great deal of hope related to education. So, to get started then, I'd like to direct your attention to one of the handouts that you received. This one is entitled One Voice for Public Policy. We're not in Kansas anymore. And I should tell you, I do publish this One Voice for Public Policy. It's a sporadic thing. This last week I put out 3 of them. It may be 6 weeks till I do the next one. So it depends what's going on in the culture. But you can access this, you can receive this directly if you go to the Minnesota South District website and go under the Public Policy tab, and there's a place there for you to enter your information, and you will receive these automatically. This is one actually that has not been put out yet. I think it's going out probably on Monday, but it is one in which I do try to give a generalized overview of what's going on, my assessment of where we're at as a culture. And so my intention is to, first of all, just work my way through this. I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I'm going to read a fair amount of it for you and then make comments as we go. The title, of course, you can see is We're Not in Kansas Anymore. This is a familiar line from The Wizard of Oz, and it has become a shorthand way of saying that we just don't live, we're not in the same world that we were a short time ago. More and more, I believe this description, we're not in Kansas anymore, is in fact an appropriate description for the culture that we find ourselves in recently. Which is to say, from my perch as a public policy advocate, it seems to me that the social turmoil that we've been experiencing, we tend to assign that to or to place the blame on our political system for that. That when we talk about these things, we almost invariably wind up talking about politics. But as time goes on and this turmoil becomes more extreme, I am more and more convinced that this is not political any longer. We have in fact slipped into a revolutionary period in our time. Which ironically, actually, I think gives us a greater voice in the church to speak to this. The church, of course, has always been hesitant to get involved in political matters, and certainly the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, has followed that general rule of thumb. However, as the issues in our society become less and less political, more and more revolutionary, that actually gives us greater leeway to speak. And so continuing here. No longer are we arguing about policies that serve the common good as we operate within the bounds of our democratic republican government as set out by the Constitution. Rather, we seem to be, what we're experiencing is a battle between 2 groups of Americans. Americans who want to continue to improve our nation by moving incrementally closer to the ideals that the ideals that are typically set out in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and others. It's those folks that want a better and better America as we move closer and closer to the ideals that are set out, versus that much smaller group of Americans who are simply committed to destroying the system. And as you well know, destroying things is a lot easier than constructing them, than building them. And so you and I have all had a ringside seat to this intentional destruction of our civil society. So in the end, even though, as I say in here, I personally have resisted the idea that we are making this kind of a dire turn. I've not wanted to believe that, but I now have to tell you that I believe that's true. And I hear it from many, many other people who make it their business to study the culture, and almost across the board, particularly in the last 2, 3, 4 months. I hear it consistently from highly respected people that we're not in Kansas anymore, okay? And though it's hard for us to accept that, it is the truth. So, continuing, I'm about halfway down the second page. In fact, we are living through a cultural revolution. We are, in fact, now living under a soft form of totalitarianism. Big word, okay? But I think you know what that means, where the government in particular is seen as totalizing. In other words, the government is in control of everything. There are no other spheres of influence in the culture. Church is gone as a real force in the culture. Families are no longer looked at as a source of strength for the culture. Everything gets focused on the government and those that control the government. The concept under which those folks operate, it has a technical name. We call it critical theory. You've probably heard it most frequently as critical race theory, but critical theory is probably the better term, or the more popularized term for that is simply being woke. Okay, wokeism really means the same thing. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you in very, very general terms about what it is to be woke. That ideology, among other things, it rejects most of what we understand to be Western civilization. So the idea of the rule of law, the idea of religious freedom, of the ability to freedom of speech, all of those fundamental things are rejected under woke theory. Okay? In addition to that, they reject the physical realities of life. In the end, where does something like, a man can become a woman, where does that come from? Well, in order to say that and believe that, you have to reject the very the truth of the physical reality around you. And in fact, that's what they operate under. It's also the case where folks that are advancing this kind of woke critical theory, they reject any of the other institutions other than the state. In their ideal world, in their utopia, the only two things that will exist are the state and you, the individual, with nothing else in between. Families mean nothing. Church means nothing. These are things that are typically called mediating institutions, things that stand between the individual and the state. all of those need to be eliminated. And of course, if you've been paying attention to what's going on in our culture, they're being pretty effective in doing that. Clearly, we're in a case where we're in a situation where we're not all playing by the same rules. We don't all see reality the same way. And in fact, we don't even agree anymore on what the common good is. That's what politics is. Politics is when you have a group of people, a society, a nation, in which you have a general agreement on what the good life looks like. You have many disagreements on how to get there. And that's what politics is, trying to move toward this ideal goal. The situation we have now is that there is no longer any agreement on what the good life looks like. In fact, there are diametrically opposed ideas of what goodness is. And so, in fact, the idea that we would each strive to be virtuous people, where in our own individual day-to-day lives, we would try to uphold basic ideals of being truthful, of caring for our neighbor, all those kinds of things. Those are no longer taken as common goals. Is it any wonder that we feel that our society is chaotic? How could we possibly have a sense of all pulling in the same direction, which is what a culture, a society should be, when we have those that are intentionally setting out to cause fractures among us. Okay, so in the end, we are very quickly moving toward a circumstance in which the fundamental freedoms and liberties that we have enjoyed soon will not be an option for us anymore. You've probably heard the justice system doesn't seem to be a single system anymore, but rather serves different people in different ways. That, in my viewpoint, that is true. And as that becomes more and more true, the idea that we would all have equal standing and be able to express our views publicly becomes less and less true. Thankfully, it still is. I'm able to stand here today and say these things, but the time may come in relatively short order where that may not be the case. So, the last part of this piece, I offer some suggestions as to where we go and what we do as individuals. I'll let you read that on your own. I do have a special pleading for pastors and other church workers in this to begin to see the situation for what it is. Namely, that these issues that we're contending with are not primarily political. Yes, they have political dimensions to them, but at their core, it's no longer political. And therefore, they have not just the right, but the duty to help guide their members to understanding what's going on through a biblical, scriptural lens. That takes some rethinking. So I'm encouraging pastors, first of all, to in their own circles, to encourage each other in talk about how to do that, how to speak about these things, and not allow it to become political. And then to actually get out and speak in public fora. Certainly in educational settings like this one, but also from the pulpit. Again, we simply are in a different place than we were, and pastors and other church workers need to find their voice. So, you can set that sheet aside, and now what I want to do is to give you a little bit more specific idea of of what the elements of woke thought are. And so if you take this other piece, it says everywhere but not out of nowhere. This just came across my desk about 2 days ago. One of the pieces of good news here is that the analysis, the thinking about what's going on here and the ability to express it in ways that average people can understand is advancing by leaps and bounds. We're now getting lots of different resources to help each one of us understand what we have been and what we are being subjected to in a way that will make sense to you, and so that you can in fact begin in your own life and beyond to take steps to counter these things. So this is a piece that, as I said, came across my desk. It talks about a presentation that was made by one of the local Catholic bishops down in the Winona diocese. There's a relatively new bishop there. Robert Barron is his name. He, he's a very thoughtful man, and in most of these issues, that old dividing line between Catholic and Lutheran, clearly there are theological issues that still are, that divide us. But on these issues of culture, there is no distinction, really. And so we feel free to use the resources that they provide as well. So in this piece, if you go to the top of the second page, very first sentence, it simply repeats what I said earlier, or I repeated it, one way or the other. But wokeism is simply the popularization of this critical theory, this idea of critical theory. And by the way, sometimes in this piece it abbreviates that as simply capital C, capital T. Sometimes instead of calling it critical theory, the term critical tells you everything. The focus of this way of looking at life is simply to criticize everything. Relentlessly criticize everything. Never do anything to build up. You are always in a destructive mode. But sometimes they don't call it critical theory, but rather conflict theory, same CT. Because the mechanism, the way they go about being critical is to foment as much conflict as possible. Not just on a national level, but within individual communities. Their intent is to destroy our trust in each other. And again, they've been quite effective there. Now, Bishop Barron here points to 4 different critical things that are true of wokeism. They're numbered 1 through 4. He's an academic, so these tend to sound pretty academic. But we'll try to make them easier to understand using just more common terms. So for the first thing that critical theory, wokeism, does is it changes our idea of ourself. He says it's a radicalization of the modern sense of self. So if you go down to toward the bottom of the page, the last paragraph there, the second sentence, he says, in his search for philosophical truth, Descartes, you've probably heard his name before, he's a philosopher from back a couple of centuries. Descartes famously said, cogito ergo sum, which translates into, I think, therefore I am. What that does then is to clearly say that the modern man is the man who thinks. Our mental ability is what makes us us. Okay? It's not your body, it's your mind. Okay? And using that as the jumping off point, Barron says, right toward the end there, he says, this compels the objective, the physical world to come before the bar or to stand trial in front of the subjective. It also causes a radical division between body and soul. As Christian people, we say, the scriptures say clearly, that we are a unity of body, mind, and soul. Okay? That's us. We're all of those things. One is not more important than the other, and so that's the image of self that Christians carry with them. We don't think about these things very often. It's not like you sit over your coffee on some morning thinking about, who am I? What am I? And then you come up with ideas. But this is what's baked into us because it's what Scripture says is true. We are a unity of all three of those. Now, if you flip to the next page, go to the first full paragraph there, and it says, another philosopher, Immanuel Kant, concluded that rather than living in a given reality, we now, as modern people, we project reality into or onto the world. In other words, I don't have to pay attention to what is physically out there. If I can reimagine it, I can impose that thought on reality, physical reality. Therefore, you get the transgender phenomenon, in which you actually claim and people actually believe that a person of one sex can become the other. In physical terms, that's absurd, and we all know that. And yet, people believe it, and they act on it, and they are militant about acting on it. They're not going to let you think, or at least express anything other than that. Okay? So that's one of the characteristics of wokeism. It simply says, I as a thinking person am going to impose my will on the rest of the world. And that's what it boils down to. Absurd as that sounds. A second element in woke thought, he calls it relativization of truth. His opening sentence there, critical theory is skeptical of all truth claims except its own. There's always that little carve out for themselves. Okay? What they want to impose on the rest of us, they're not willing to impose on themselves. A couple of sentences later, he says, in effect, this aims to pull back the curtain of truth to reveal power plays behind all claims of truth. All truth claims are a form of oppression. You've probably heard that term, oppression, oppressor, frequently. We hear it in the news. People love to talk about oppressors and the oppressed. Well, that comes from this idea here, that truth is not, there is no such thing as objective truth. True truth, real truth. There's only what you think it is and what you try to impose on somebody else. So it looks at all the foundational things that we build on our life on, particularly those in Scripture, and it simply says they aren't true. It's simply your way of trying to impose yourself on me. If you drop all the way down to the bottom of that page, this is referring to yet another philosopher, Derrida. There's no meaning to a given text, but rather meaning is always deferred in the ultimate play of the text. Everything is open-ended. There is no place to stand. In other words, you can't have a conversation with your fellow citizen because the minute you try to found your conversation on a claim of truth, something is true, that is immediately rejected, and so conversation stops. That's the bottom line for this. You can't have a serious conversation with your fellow citizens. Does that ring true? Very difficult. Sometimes, you know, in more closed circles, probably here, we feel freer to speak about what we really think. But out in the general public, that is almost completely lost. That's not a bug, that's not a fault of critical theory. It is one of the essential elements of critical theory. It's there by design. Sorry to be so upbeat. Early in the morning. But again, we simply are at a point where we need to speak very directly. Yes, ma'am?
Well, this past week I wrote a letter to the editor about life issues. I mean, they still print it, but eventually that will be allowed in there.
Yeah, depends where you're submitting those things. Probably your local paper will still publish things like that. But the broader the reach of a publication, the less likely it is that you'll actually be able to express those views publicly.
We're all to be critical thinkers, to look at what is happening, but this critical theory is always destroying and destructing.
It is, yes.
But
Critical is the key word. Always criticizing, never building up. Drop all the way down to the second, well, actually the last full paragraph there, referring to this other philosopher, Derrida. Derrida's influence also shows up here. He believed there are basic binaries in our language, male, female, straight, queer, black, white. For critical theory, binary opposites always reflect this idea of the oppressed and the oppressor. The whole world, it gets divided into those two large groups. And once you are identified as being part of one of them, there is no opportunity for you to switch sides. Okay? Everybody, there is no third option. You fit into one or the other. And so for us as Christians, one of the critical concepts of Christianity, of course, is forgiveness. That we are all sinful people, and that God in His grace has forgiven us through Christ, and we therefore do the same toward others. And so even though there are differences among people in opinions and attitudes, still we operate under the belief, the conviction that we are all sinful, that we all have received forgiveness, and that we should all extend forgiveness to others. That is completely rejected by woke theory. In the end, the divisions are there and they are permanent. So, as Christian people, as we look at this, that's one of the really big red flags that should get waved here. Okay? And then the last of these four characteristics, here's some big words again. It says the play of substructure and superstructure. All he's saying here is that for people who use critical theory as their way of organizing the world in their minds, they tend to focus on one issue and it becomes all-consuming. And in the case of critical theory as we know it in our culture today, that one issue is race, which is why you hear so much about critical race theory. But in the end, everything boils down to race and one group of people trying to impose their views on other people. And then the claim is that, especially for we here in the United States, that one organizing theme for our nation from its beginning was racism. That's why, according to them, that's why America was founded, to impose racism, and specifically white supremacy. You hear that phrase frequently, right? And so, therefore, one of the tasks of critical theorists is to rewrite history so that it points back not to our founding, the Declaration of Independence and that period of time, not to 1776, but to what other year do they? The year 1619. Why is that significant? Because that is the first year, that is the year in which the first black slaves were brought onto the North American continent. And their contention is that everything that has happened on this continent, in this country, since then, all has the intent of supporting racial division, white supremacy. And they have written a history to try and prove that. That history, what is called here the 1619 Project, it's a pet project of the New York Times magazine, and it is now what is taught in at least 5,000 classrooms across the country today. It has penetrated our educational system to a degree that's mind-boggling. Even though virtually every serious historian says it is a complete distortion of history. But still, that's what's required. You have to change history if you want a way to change the way people think about their nation. Okay. So, in the end, when you take all of those things together, the operating claim in the minds of people who adopt critical theory is that, first of all, we are not created beings. Virtually every one of them would take an evolutionary view. In other words, we are just accidents of nature. And therefore, the God that we worship, the God that we look to tell us who we are as human beings, that God is rejected. And the power that we assign to God, the power to tell us who we are and how our world operates best, that power now is claimed by us. We become gods. That ought to have a familiar ring to it. It takes us right back to the Garden of Eden. Because, of course, that was the first temptation, right? Satan speaking to Eve and saying, you can become like God. Nothing new under the sun. All right, so at any rate, if you go to the very last sentence of page 5, the reference here is to yet another philosopher. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. It's called Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, a German guy, as many of these were. The author here says, Nietzsche took all of this to its logical conclusion. God is dead, that's what Nietzsche's claim was, and we are the ones who killed him, and the absolute power that used to belong to God now belongs to us. Therefore, the audacious claim among many that you can change yourself from a man to a woman is based on this idea. Biblically, we have the same kind of thing. Many of you are familiar with the parable of the evil tenants. You remember a parable that Jesus taught in which there were tenants that came and took over a vineyard, essentially rented a vineyard from its owner. The owner went away, and at the harvest time, the owner sent representatives to say, now's the time to pay me my rightful share of the harvest. And you know what happened. First they beat up and killed the first group of servants they sent. He sent the second group, same thing happened with them. Finally he sends his son, and they do the same thing to him. And then it tells us about the logic that lies behind that. It tells us that these evil tenants believe that if they could kill the heir, kill the son, that the vineyard would then become theirs. There's no logic, there's no legal logic in that, first of all. But that was their thought, that if we essentially kill God, or God's representative, then all of that power becomes resident in us. And we're going to act accordingly then.
10:15.
What's that?
It's 10:15.
Translate that for me.
Halfway.
Okay, thanks. That's my wife, Rachel. You should be very thankful that she's here. Otherwise, I'm a pastor and subject to all the love for speaking that entails. All right, so just in very, very general terms, that's what wokeism is all about. That's what people view as the utopia. They want to refashion our culture with these concepts. Okay. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
After hearing all that, I can just see how, during my daily devotions, reading in God's Word, how important that is in your Christian life.
Yes. Where is it that you counter these things? It's the same place that Jesus found a resource when he was being tempted. What was his constant refrain? The scriptures say this. And that has to be our reference point as well. Can't build a defense based on what you think, but rather on the truth of scriptures. And so, hence my emphasis and the emphasis of the church on reclaiming education. It is an absolute essential. The Spirit can do whatever the Spirit likes. I grant you that, and I'm not disputing that. But from a human point of view, until we reclaim the educational system, we are bound to continue to travel down the road that we have been in recent years. Okay, so at this point then I'd like to shift gears a little bit, leave all that abstract thought behind, and take a look at how this actually has been translated into real world, into life here in the state of Minnesota in particular. This is the part of the presentation that they asked me to give a title to what I was going to speak about, and so what I chose to say was, if you want to know what paganism looks like in the modern world, this will tell you. This is, and the first piece here that I want to direct your attention to is the one that has one voice, and then it's got a little block up in the front here. You'll get it shortly. This is one of the one voice pieces that I put out about a year and a half ago, shortly after the first legislative session in this biennium. So after you have an election, which we did back in 2022, then the legislature here in Minnesota and everywhere else, then it enters into a session, but that session is actually divided into 2 parts, 2 different years. And what I'm describing in this piece is what came out of the first half of that biennium, specifically as it relates to life issues. It was by far the most radical legislative session that we have, certainly in our lifetime, have ever experienced, and I suspect in the history of the state. Flip to the second page, and I'll just run down some of the things that were passed. And I'll warn you ahead of time, you're likely to start thinking that I'm lying to you, okay? Because these are so egregious, so radical. But this is actually what happened. So, under number 1, within the first, I want to say 2 weeks of the session, virtually, it is very rare that any bill is passed until maybe halfway through the session. Most of them get passed right at the end. This is one that was set out as the top priority of one of the political parties. And for information's sake, I will tell you that that's the Democratic Party. This is almost entirely the agenda of the Democratic Party. Okay? It's just a statement of fact. So, the first of these was, the title that was given to it was Protecting Reproductive Options Act, or for short, the PRO Act. It established, it's a done deal now, abortion as the fundamental right through all nine months of pregnancy, with no definition given to what a fundamental right means. It goes far beyond Roe versus Wade. Of course, Roe versus Wade is now has been set aside, but still, in comparing it to that, it opens the door for the sterilization of children, prevents cities and other local units of government from regulating mobile abortion clinics, which might want to operate in their community. So, this act, it's very short. I want to say it's only 2 paragraphs in length, but it speaks in very broad language. And these are typically are the most impactful kinds of legislation, because they set the tone for everything else. And in this case, they simply said that abortion is a fundamental right. And if you really want to scare yourself, then consider the fact that they never define what a fundamental right is or does. Which effectively means that any person, typically a judge, that would be trying to interpret this law, can impose on it whatever they feel is the right content. Typically, one of the main reasons why laws are judged to be unconstitutional is that they are vague. This is vagueness on steroids, but it gives free rein to anybody, particularly in the judiciary or in the bureaucracy of government, which functions more and more like judges every day. And so they're now free to impose on this whatever meaning they want. A second thing that was passed, it's called the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. Previously provided protection for infants who survived an abortion procedure. That no longer, that was repealed. So if a doctor, an abortionist is trying to abort a baby and they fail, the baby is born alive, no longer do the doctors have to treat it as a patient. In other words, they no longer have to use their skills to save the life of the patient. It completely stands medical ethics on its head. Yes.
I had a question on number 1 in regards to the so-called fundamental right. Was that just granted to the pregnant mother, or is that granted to all citizens? And the reason I ask that question is if somebody with a depraved mind decides to go and perform an abortion, if you will, on an unwilling mother or a pregnant woman, can that person then claim he had the fundamental right to perform that abortion even though it was against the will of the mother?
I don't believe so. Now, in that case, that person would be liable to prosecution under the law.
I would hope so.
Certainly because of the damage done to the woman. They might not prosecute him, as having killed the child, or what we believe to be the child, know to be the child. So there are still reasons why they could not do that.
I just didn't know how much was...
Well, I mean, it does point out the fact that the only limiting factor under the PRO Act is your imagination. Right? It is so open, so vague, that it should scare every citizen because there are no limits. Paul, you should be familiar with this kind of concept in the law, I would think.
I can't hear you.
Okay, third rather, pregnancy resource centers. Coming out of the legislative session, they were all stripped of state funding. The state had, for a number of decades, allocated, I want to say, like $4 million a year to help support crisis pregnancy centers. The state recognizing that they were doing a public service by helping to support women with unexpected pregnancies and so forth. So all those dollars were removed from these pregnancy resource centers and were in fact diverted to abortion rights organizations. Again, definitions were changed, and all of a sudden the intent of that law was reversed 180 degrees. Number 4, nearly all reporting requirements for abortion facilities were removed. Minnesota used to be pretty good in terms of getting data on what was going on in the abortion industry here. That's all gone. It is now all cloaked in secrecy. And that same idea, I have to tell you, carries forward now in what's happening in the next legislative session. The reference was made here a little earlier ago to a public hearing that was held at the Capitol. Was that yesterday? Thursday, yeah. There is a bill that has been placed before the legislature to allow the legalization of physician-assisted suicide. It was a marathon hearing. I was one of 80 presenters. That was a long set, I'll tell you. But the point being that when all of that presenting was done, one of the amendments that was proposed was simply that the bill include the requirement that those who engage in assisted suicide would report the data to the state, just the way we used to have to do it for abortions. That amendment was defeated strictly on partisan grounds, but most notably, there was no debate about it. The two sides have stopped talking to each other entirely. Those that were proposing to have greater reporting done about assisted suicide, the other side was not willing to engage even in conversation about it. It's very telling when you get to the point where, again, there's no conversation. This is no longer politics. Okay, this is something else. Number 5, an existing law requiring abortions to be performed only by physicians was repealed. So now you can have other medical providers, nurse practitioners, PAs, that sort of thing. They now have all the same rights as physicians do to perform this. Number 6, an existing law requiring second and third trimester abortions to be performed in a hospital was repealed. Of course, the reason that it was there in the first place is because in terms of risk to the mother, second and third trimester abortions are much riskier. But clearly, the concern for the health of the mother is not operating here, and this would indicate that. Number 7, an existing law requiring informed consent before an abortion could be performed was repealed, as well as the requirement to give women basic information about the development of their child, the embryological development. That now is gone. All of these incremental steps designed to protect the woman and the fetus that had been worked on for decades in one broad swipe were removed. And that's where we stand today. Number 8, Minnesota now pledges to protect women who travel to Minnesota for an abortion, even if the state in which they come from has legislation, laws that say you cannot abort, let's say after a certain length of pregnancy. If they make it into the state, if they cross the state line, the state of Minnesota will essentially stand up and protect that woman from the other state who might want to enforce their own laws. So the state of Minnesota has placed itself in opposition to many other states in the Union. Number 9, Minnesota now has expanded medical assistance and Minnesota Care to include abortion. That was not true before. They also increased the reimbursement rates. They jumped up 20% by legislative action. Number 10, Minnesota now pledges to protect abortionists from other states who are being prosecuted for violation of that other state's abortion law, and pledges to grant a Minnesota state medical license to doctors who have lost their license in other states due to abortion-related violations. So if another doctor in another state violates the laws of that state relating to abortion, and they become the object of prosecution, you know, that the other state is going to go after that doctor for having violated the law. Once again, if that doctor crosses over in the state line into Minnesota, Minnesota will not cooperate in that prosecution. They would not, what's the word when you send people back?
Extradite?
We will not extradite them. And if they have lost their license in that other state, we will give them one. As I said, you will not want to believe what actually has happened, but that is the current law here in Minnesota. If you jump down to number 14, this is one that is not specifically, doesn't specifically involve life issues, but still, it's related. In what seems to be a clear violation of basic standards of justice, Minnesota will now create a new database for all hate offenses as reported from anyone in the general public. There is no definition of what a hate offense is, nor is there any verification mechanism to determine whether such an incident actually occurred. There is no explicit guarantee that the names of specific people will not be included in this database. So now the state is in the process of setting up a computerized system where anybody who wants to report anybody else and say they committed a hate crime, the state will accept that accusation. They will not investigate it to find out if it actually happened. They do not guarantee that your name won't be used, leaked, and therefore you face the wrath
Retaliation.
the woke crowd. I mean, the idea that such a thing could exist, where you don't even define what a hate crime is. Once again, the lack of definition ought to scare you to the depth of your being. But we are now setting that up. It violates virtually every legal tenet that we have, our basic legal system. Innocent until proven guilty has absolutely been run over. And then, again, related, not real as directly, under number 17, in a direct attack on Christianity and other faiths, overturning decades of precedent, legislation was passed forbidding high school students from using their PSEO benefits at colleges or universities with a creedal statement. In other words, religious schools. So in the past, I would assume some of you maybe have had kids that use the PSEO program, post-secondary educational options. Is that right? Yes. And those kids, high school kids who wanted to take college courses and get college credit, could choose from any post-secondary institution. Didn't matter if it was religiously affiliated or not. This legislature said, oh, no. You can only use it in a secular setting. In effect, putting their stamp of approval on secularism, on a non-religious view of life. Were you aware of this?
Oh, yes.
This got a little bit more press than some of the others.
Can
Yes.
any of these be brought to the Supreme Court for overturning? And
Yes, that's part of the good news here. This particular thing, shortly after it was passed, there were two colleges, one of them quite local, Crown College, filed a lawsuit against the state, essentially saying this is patently unconstitutional. It didn't take long for the state to back down and say, we won't enforce this. They didn't say they'd take it off the books, they just said we won't enforce it. With the hope, of course, that that lawsuit would then end. Well, thankfully, the lawsuit did not end. It is proceeding through the courts, and in all likelihood, the courts will clearly identify this as an unconstitutional act. But the fact that it's so obviously unconstitutional, and the legislature still passed it, tells you a whole lot about where we're at.
Do you recall how many amendments were suggested by the Republicans to try to not allow these things?
Oh,
I mean, it's not like they sat there on their hands.
No, right. And part of the backdrop of all of this, of course, is that last legislative session and the one that's about to start on the 12th of February, you have what has come to be called the trifecta, where one party, the Democratic Party, controls the House, the Senate, and the governor's seat. However, in the Senate, they control the Senate by only one vote. And so it was thought by most observers that that would mean that they would not be able to pass anything close to the things that we just went through. The fact of the matter is that one vote majority held together in a way that has never, a true political system would never allow that kind of lockstep motion. But there apparently were such levels of intimidation brought on every member of the Democratic Party that they all stuck together. And by virtue, every one of these things, and every one of the hundreds of amendments that were proposed, were all passed by a one vote majority. Clearly, no independent thought happened. Paul?
Is there some effort continuing as to change the Constitution? State of Minnesota to make abortion a constitutional right.
Yes. So, fast forward now into this new year and the coming new session. One of the stated goals of the woke party is that they want to pass a constitutional amendment, much like the one that was just passed in Ohio a couple of months ago, in which they write into the state constitution language which says basically the same language as the PRO Act. In other words, that abortion is a fundamental right. Again, without definitions, but just this blanket, flat statement. Whether they will be able to do that or not remains to be seen. Ohio was thought to be basically a pro-life state in which they could not accomplish this. They did, in part because Ohio required only a simple majority to change their constitution. Here in Minnesota, it's, I believe it's 60%. So it'll be more difficult here, but still, it appears that they're going to try to do this.
So,
Yes.
the constitutional amendment, we get to vote on, right?
Yes.
Not just the legislature.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the whole point, is that this is something that goes before all the people, and presumably those that understand what's being suggested here will say no. However, we know, again, Ohio being the most recent example of this, when enough pressure, when enough financial resources are brought to bear, you can misrepresent something in a way that you'll get people voting against their own self-interest. We would be foolish to think that it couldn't happen here. I hope it wouldn't, but.
How does the people's vote in that circumstance count? Is it one vote is counts as one, or is it like the political realm where you've got voting districts? What am I thinking? I'm thinking maybe when it comes to presidency.
I think it's just a popular vote.
Okay.
The largest number of votes in the whole state carries the day. Hey, any other, Paul?
I probably shouldn't ask, but I'm wondering, I keep hearing about my body is my body, and you let me alone, I'll make the decision. No law should ever be passed or any court decision that affects that decision. My body is my body. I'm wondering what the women here think about that.
Ladies? Of course, it affects all of us, it's not just women. But,
No, I can understand that, and I agree in a way. But it's really blown up as being, stay away from this abortion thing.
yeah. So I read something recently where the political divide between men and women, there's always been some divide, but it has become much broader in the last several election cycles, and particularly the difference in voting patterns between women that are married and those that are not. With married women, there is essentially no difference in their voting patterns with men. It becomes pretty much the same. Women who have never been married, on the other hand, skew far, far to the left. And so, of course, that's been used very effectively in the 2022 voting cycle, nationally as well as here in Minnesota. If it had not been for this really skewed voting pattern of single women, it would have been a very different outcome. But it simply reflects changes in our society where marriage has become denigrated. Many fewer people enter into the estate of marriage, and that has all kinds of implications, including the issue of abortion.
15 minutes.
Okay.
Fred, does a man have any rights at all? I mean, most of the time, it takes two to have a baby, and the woman is having this abortion, but what about the her mate's right?
Yeah. You want a short answer? No. And that's not being silly. I mean, that's just, that's
that's
a
the way it
statement
is.
of fact. So that in fact, the idea that it takes two to make a baby really isn't even acknowledged. Remember I told you that they reject the fundamental physical realities of the world? Well, this would be another example of that. Even though all of us know that, and we laugh at the idea that men would have zero input on such a basic decision.
Well, that's where it should stay right there, is zero input.
For men?
Yes.
Well, yeah, according to their view of the world. And that's why it is so important to understand how they view the world. Because coming from where they do, those 4 points, no such thing as truth, the 4 that we went through, their policies make sense to them. They think they're doing us a favor. In fact, I was just telling Rachel as we were driving over here earlier, there's a quote from C.S. Lewis that I have seen more and more frequently because it is more and more applicable. Lewis said that there is no one more dangerous, no tyrant more dangerous than one who believes that they are doing what they are doing for your good. Because that tyrant never has to face his own conscience. They honestly believe that what they are doing is good for not just them, but you too. And therefore, they have a passion, and I would call it a religious fervor for what they do, in which they, as passionate as we are about our faith, they are the same way. And wokeism, critical theory, is a religious belief system. It is religion to them. And we have to understand that. Therefore, the kinds of argument that we might use with them, that typically you would use in conversation, doesn't work because it is a religious commitment on their part.
That was one of the things that always came in my mind when you think of trying to talk with somebody who's woke. They want to divide between the oppressors and the oppressed, and they claim that Christians are oppressors. Well, if Christians are becoming the minority, wouldn't that then make them the oppressed? If they're oppressing Christianity, doesn't that then make, and they would never view it that way, even though that would be the reality of it. They wouldn't accept that thought. And so they're, like you said,
well, the numbers really don't have any bearing on it whatsoever. The idea that an oppressed group is a minority, a larger number, that's not part of their definition of being oppressed. You could be part of the 99% that hold these woke views. They will always look at that 99% as being the oppressed, even though there's maybe a small minority they claim are doing the oppressing. I mean, it really takes, in order for you to understand these things, it takes your mind and it just turns it into a pretzel. All the logical patterns of thought that you have relied on in the past are rejected. Yet another reason why conversation is virtually impossible. Yes?
I'm not going to tell you about your time.
Okay, good.
But part of the reason that you often bring up is the fact that they have taken control of our language, and even the name critical theory. If you do a critique, you're supposed to be looking at the positive and the negative, and they have made it completely negative. And so a lot of the language that we're used to using, they have given a different meaning to. And so you can't, it's like you're speaking a different language.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of the favorite tactics, of course, of this mindset, this religious group, is that they reserve the right to redefine words however they choose, to either redefine them or to alter them slightly. So one of the most famous ones, and the one we hear most frequently, most of us subscribe to the general idea of equality, the equality of all mankind. We go back to Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, I dream of a day in which my 3 young daughters will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is the appropriate way to judge people. Well, that's just completely inverted now. The claim is that the only way you can judge people is by the color of their skin. And the content of their character, whether they are virtuous people or not, must be ignored. Again, just trying to think in those terms. I mentioned the word equal or equality. What's the new word that's been imported to replace that? Equity. Okay. Equity, equality sounds pretty much the same, and most people think it is the same. But of course, equality of opportunity to grow and benefit from the goods of society. Equality of opportunity is very different than equity. Equity talks in terms of quotas, that you must have the same percentage of people experiencing the same kind of benefits. So, what's a good example? There are so many.
10 minutes.
Okay. Yes.
So then going forward, if the language is changing, how do we engage in those conversations?
It's very difficult. So, I'll just take you back to, again, to Scripture. After the flood, Noah and his children, they repopulate the earth, but it's not too long until they are making mischief again. In what form?
Tower of Babel.
They are busy building the Tower of Babel. And so God hates what they are doing. And so what is his solution to that? What will stop them from engaging in this anti-God act? Well, it's the confusion of their language. And so the woke crowd understands that. I'm sure they read Scripture like we do, but for a different effect. And so the idea that you confuse the language, and in that confusion you create chaos, and in that chaos you create opportunity to seize power. That is the ultimate goal, is the seizure of power. In circumstances where society is settled, where it's calm, where people are generally happy with their life, there's very little opportunity to seize political power or cultural power. You need to create chaos. You need to have the society fracture. That's the point at which someone can step in and say, I'll save you. I know how to do this. Put your trust in me. And of course, then you've given inordinate amounts of power to someone who you don't know. That's the plan. That's the big picture. Yes.
I think it's safe to say, we've heard this many times in the past, that elections have consequences. And I think what we need to do as a society is to spend a little bit more effort on understanding what those people we're voting for stand for. It's no longer an issue of which party my family has always voted for, what my history is. We have to pay attention to the issues. And I know you send out every election season the voter's guide on not who to vote for, but what the issues are. And we really need to know and understand those and be brave to step outside of the box we've normally been in and take care of things. Because in this last election, our Minnesota people that helped to vote this in won by landslides. That means that our Christians voted for them too.
Yes. Good point. On the issue of language, let me just observe one other thing. The most critical words in our language are the simplest words. In other words, our pronouns. He, she, they, all of those things, even though they are tiny bits in our language, they are what organize our thought into rational patterns. And so when it is demanded of us that we pervert the language by using pronouns that do not match the physical characteristics of the person you're speaking with, you are in effect destroying the language in a way that's almost incalculable. It seems so strange that, again, such tiny words can have such a great impact, but they do. And that's why so many people absolutely refuse to do that. They try to put pressure on you, don't you want to be nice to this other person who, for all the world, looks like a woman to you, but claims to be a man? Don't you want to be nice to them? Don't you want to call them by their new name? Well, to be honest, calling somebody by a different name, well, it's the Johnny Cash song, Boy Named Sue. That's really not such a big problem. There are probably 30 or 40, 50 names that are common among us now that I don't have a clue if they're a male or female by their first name. That is as it is. And so the request or the demand that you use their preferred name really is not much of an issue to us. The demand, on the other hand, that you use the pronouns that they insist on, that is a huge issue. And it's just one of many other perversions of the language that keep us off balance. We want to be nice people. We want to be respectful of the feelings of others. We don't set out to cause them harm or pain, psychological pain. But on the other hand, we have to understand that allowing ourselves to have our language corrupted is that thing, one of the main things that will cause our society to collapse. Just the way it happened back in Babel.
Hasn't the government removed the gender pronouns from some of their medical forms and other kind of forms that we're supposed to fill out?
It depends a lot on how people react to them. We went to the eye doctor a couple of weeks ago, and they have you fill out some forms beforehand, and one of them asks for your pronouns. I mean, this is an eye doctor in little old Gaylord, and so my wife, we took offense at this, and so when we got there for the appointment, we talked to the optometrist and said, "Are you aware of what you're asking us to do?" "No, what's going on?" The optometrist, I'm convinced, was completely unaware of it. It was somebody in their office that had decided this was a good thing to do and simply plugged it in. To be honest, I haven't gone back and looked, but I suspect that has been removed. All it takes is a few people to speak up and say, "This isn't right. You're asking me to violate essentially my Christian belief, and I won't do that." So, yes, sometimes these things get rolled back, and sometimes in fairly easy and quick fashion. On the other hand, the more the government is involved in it, the less likely that that's true. But there are lawsuits in process. Many of these things will be rolled back because they are patently unconstitutional. But that all takes time. And in the meantime, great damage is done. The level of trust among us is eroded, and pretty soon we don't know if we can talk to each other anymore. And that's dangerous. What do I have left? Half a minute?
11 o'clock.
Wow, I'm so proud of me. Got done when we were supposed to. All right, so take a break. How long are we? 15 minutes or?
Or get your coffee and come back if that's okay with you.
That's fine. The resources that I believe is on your table, it's the one that has underlined critical theory as religion. See that? That'll be the primary resource that we're going to use for this last segment. Again, just to kind of get us into this a little bit, I'm just going to read a few parts and then we'll kind of go off from there. And I've mentioned this briefly, but I want to reinforce this idea that this thing called wokeism, critical theory, is not just some small thing in people's lives. It really does act as a religion. So, quoting, critical theory as an all-encompassing explanation of everything. I use the term totalitarianism, big, fat, long word. But that's what this means, is when you have some explanation that claims to account for everything, to explain everything. That's what is characteristic of a tyrant, of a totalitarian state. All right, moving along. It offers answers to all the important questions of life. In that way, it behaves as, and should be regarded as, a religion. In fact, critical theory, wokeism, is a direct competitor to all the other religions, but most especially is a competitor to Christianity. And then you have that little chart there that I hope will kind of set this out in fairly stark terms. So to the question, who am I? Pretty basic question, right? Christianity says, at my core, I am a creature made in God's image. That's what the book of Genesis tells us. Those that subscribe to critical theory would say that I am a member of various social groups locked in a struggle for dominance. Now, what does that sound like to you? What kind of theory is that? There's a one word. Marxist. It's Marxist, but even more basic than Marxist. It is socialist, but even more basic is it is an evolutionist view. When you want to explain where did we come from, are we the product of chance, or are we the intentional creation of a loving God in whose image we are made? Depending where you come down on that question, it's going to launch you into a certain trajectory in life. And the fact of the matter is, the evolutionary point of view is the only view that is allowed to be taught in our public educational circles. If you doubt that, just try to insert some biblical teaching on that count. You will soon find yourself looking for another job. And that's been enforced over and over again. So, with regard to this specific question, it's pretty clear that these two systems of thought, Christian thought, Christianity, and woke, are just on opposite ends of the spectrum. To the question, what is the fundamental human problem? We all agree that life is not perfect, right? Our world is not perfect. Therefore, we agree that we have a problem. But what is that fundamental problem? Well, as Christians, we say that that fundamental problem is this thing called sin. Our rebellion against the God who created us takes 1,000, 10,000 different forms, but at its core, it is always a rejection of the God who created us. On the other hand, critical theorists say that the fundamental problem is that some of us are oppressors, and therefore are guilty of sin against other people, which means that there are others among us, those who are oppressed, who are regarded as essentially without sin. So, whereas the Bible tells us that all have fallen short of the glory of God, a critical theory subscriber would reject that. Okay. In regard to the question, how can this problem be solved? Well, the Christian answer to sin is, you see it there, forgiveness. Well, actually, you don't see it. I forget if I penciled that in or not.
Yeah. Mine is penciled in.
Okay, good. I did that special for you. Or another way of putting that, of course, is to be redeemed, to be bought back from our sinful condition by virtue of what Jesus has done for us. So, in the Christian view of the world, of the way things are, yes, we do fall short of the glory of God. However, there is this sure hope that we have in Christ that the consequences of that sin need not be, will not be visited on us. In other words, Christ died on the cross for us in our stead. Now, when you compare that with the way a critical theory proponent would look at it, they would say that the way you get at that problem is by activism. Usually they mean political activism or even beyond politics. A common phrase that is used among those who describe themselves as woke is they simply say, by all means necessary. In other words, there are no rules, there are no boundaries that they have to stay within. And therefore, you have this shocking example of chaos. Go back to George Floyd and all the riots that took place after that. I don't know about you, but I was pretty shocked at what I saw just down the road, not very far. And how could people behave that way? Well, they can behave that way because in the end, they have placed themselves on the innocent side of the scale, and they are going to react, do whatever is necessary to attack the other side, those oppressors in their view. And if that means burning buildings to the ground and physically attacking others, that's okay, by all means necessary. Next question. What is my primary moral duty? What am I called to do with my life? What's the right thing? As Christians, we say ultimately, we give glory to God. Now, that's not just by showing up at worship on Sunday morning or Bible study or whatever. We give glory to God in every facet of our life, in every way that we can, to reflect God's forgiveness, reflect God's love to those around us. And that's what fills our life. Okay? Now, to one subscribing to critical theory, wokeism, they would say that their primary moral duty, the thing they have to do, is to dismantle these unjust systems and structures. Remember, we said the fundamental problem with America is that it's racist, that white supremacy is at the core of who we are. And they say then the necessary thing for them to do is to destroy everything that has grown up to support this system of racism. And they would look at virtually every aspect of civil society, the courts, police, the family, the church, you name it, needs to be destroyed. And that's their moral duty. Okay? So they're acting on what they think is good. And that takes us back to C.S. Lewis's quote, nobody is more dangerous than the one who thinks they are doing something for your good. Because their conscience will give them the stamp of approval for that. Another basic question, how do I know the truth? Well, as Christians, we have two sources for truth. One is the world around us. We see how God has created it with great order. And so we take our cues from that to say there must be God must be a God of order. And he must want us to live a life of order and have a society that is structured in an orderly way. Okay? Now, that in general, looking at the world around us and using those cues, that is called natural law. And we as Lutheran Christians, we subscribe to that. We say, yes, you can look at the world around you, and it does give you reliable information about how we should behave. However, we don't stop there. There is another source of reliable truth, and that is the Scriptures. And so, for us, while the natural law gives us kind of vague indications of how God wants us to live, what a good life looks like, a godly life, the Scriptures give us much more precision in that. Okay? And so we spend our time, particularly as children, but as adults too, searching the Scriptures, for in them you will find truth, essentially. As Christians, that's how we answer this question. How do you know what's true? A person that's committed to critical theory simply says, I will know the truth as I experience it. In other words, it's only the experiences of my own life that I can rely on to tell me about my truth. They probably won't claim that it's truth for everybody, but it is truth for them, and you need to respect that. If it's true for me, then you have to treat it as true for you. And therefore, when we have differences of opinion, let's say in some political matter, it could be abortion. The claim on the part of the woke crowd is simply that some people have the personal experiences that allow them to speak to that issue. Okay? What are the personal experiences that would qualify you? You need to be a woman. Well, that's basically it. So they would, to your point, your question earlier, Ken, you don't have any say in this because you are of the wrong sex. You don't have the right set of experiences to speak to this. Therefore, kindly sit there and be quiet. Oh, I waited a long time
That's
to
a way
say
to say
that. Can we do that again? But I'm serious. In the end, it's particularly in public settings, only some people are allowed to speak. And you have to have the right experiences. Now, could you be a male and speak to this? Yes, if you consider yourself oppressed. You don't have to have any evidence for that, but just consider yourself that. So, in the end, some people are worth listening to and other people are not. Hard to have a conversation that way. And then, finally, what is the end goal of history? What waits for us at the end of either our personal history, the end of our life, or the end of history as we know it in the world? Well, as Christians, we say that we look forward to a new heaven and a new earth. God, who values the physical world that He created us, there appears to be every indication in Scripture that there will be, that the physical world will be rehabilitated just as we will, just as our physical bodies will be raised from the dead and made perfect. Now, it's something that we don't lay a lot of emphasis on in our church, but that's what we say in the creed every Sunday. The resurrection of the body. The body is important. It's as important as your mind or your soul. Okay? Therefore, as Lutherans, we translate that into a high view of the sacraments. So, baptism, the Lord's Supper, we regard it as very important, as opposed to other church bodies where the body is discounted, not thought as important, or perhaps not important at all. The Reformed churches, many of them have that view of the body. There's a heresy as old as the church that they are falling prey to. It's called Gnosticism, and among many aspects of it, it says that physical things in general and your body in particular has no meaning or importance. Okay? To the degree that you believe that, you will tend to subscribe to these critical theory ideas. To the degree that you look to Scripture and you find out that, no, my body is just as important as my mind and my soul, then you have a biblical view of Scripture, and one that our church body subscribes to. As opposed to that, the end of history, as far as critical theory folks are concerned, their idea of utopia, their idea of heaven, is when all these social ills, all these oppressors are gone, and the oppressed are no longer oppressed. That will be heaven for them. When that will come, and how? Well, we know how it will come. It will come by destroying what currently exists. And their view is that by destroying the structure that exists in society now, that from the ruins, somehow, some way, something better will rise out of that. They're very vague about how that's going to happen. Okay? So, these are just some examples of how to distinguish people who subscribe to critical theory versus Christians who view the world through a biblical and natural law lens. Any questions about that?
A comment.
Yeah.
As Christians, and viewing this, idea of forgiveness that we offer, that Christ gave to us and that we extend, makes us more tolerant and allows for these minorities to dominate. How do we counteract that?
Right, so they understand that they're using one of our own, a good godly tendency to be tolerant. They use it against us very effectively. And so that means that we have to be mature enough in our faith to understand when we're in a situation in which that tolerance is not warranted. That the most unloving thing to do would be to be tolerant. Love, of course, shows itself, love for our neighbor shows itself in knowing at what time and at what place you are silent, tolerant, and at what time you speak. It requires a lot of thought, it requires a lot of grounding in Scripture. It's why we as Lutherans are so absolutely committed to Christian education, because it takes that amount of time, that amount of study in the Word to produce people who are mature enough to make those distinctions. Does that help?
Yeah, and I think a lot of parents, you see moving from the public education system, especially here, into Christian schools. They're growing now because of what's being taught in the public schools. And they're not really speaking out against it, but their action of moving their children away from there speaks.
Yeah. So many people who would have a very hard time articulating anything like what I just said, they have a sense, a deep sense that there's something fundamentally wrong. They seem to tie it to something going on in the public schools, and therefore they're willing to pay the price to make a move. But they would be hard pressed, as I said, to articulate what that is. So then, and that's wonderful, we celebrate that. To a lesser degree, we experience that out in Gaylord, and I know you do here at Trinity. But you of course are bringing people into the school environment that have less than a fully developed understanding of why that school exists. And therefore, one has to be particularly aware, Dan, I'm sure you're aware of this, to have certainly any new faculty that we have, to make sure that they are well grounded in why a Christian school exists, and that families that come into the school community over time are educated there as well. They're going to get a lot more than they bargained for if they stay around, and most of them are staying around. That's wonderful, but it does put some added responsibility on us, a joyful responsibility. Okay, let me continue then toward the bottom of that page. It says, in effect, the new faith of critical theory wokeism has, for all intents and purposes, been adopted by our government as the new state religion. And the state is now in the process of using all the levers of governmental power at its disposal to convert or coerce all citizens, especially children, to this rival faith. Okay? There's a missionary fervor that is at work here. It is an effort now being directed at the capture of all institutions in our society, the media, which are largely already captive, the mainstream media. If you are still watching the mainstream news, don't. They have become masters at taking and twisting and being selective in what they will present to you and how they present it. I know we've all built up this sense of trust with the CBSs and NBCs of the world, and we almost feel like they're friends of ours, especially the anchors and whatnot. But that works to our great disadvantage, because they are not presenting the world to you as it currently is. There are other places to go, much more reliable sources of information, and I think I actually, did I list some of those here?
On the last
The
page.
last page? Yeah, there's some of them.
Was it on the last packet?
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
it
last
could be.
packet we went through on, I'm not sure what
Yeah.
page it is.
So I'm not gonna take time to go through them right now, but be assured that there are sources that are more reliable than others. Nobody's perfect, but it's something we have to bear in mind. So, the media, the bureaucracies and agencies of government, they are totally captive. There may be individual people within them that still oppose these kinds of woke concepts, but if they want to keep their job, they will not be vocal about it. The military, we've seen that recently. The law, the legal system, not completely captive, but to a larger degree than we probably are aware. Family, the church, even medicine now has been corrupted by this. All you have to do is look at how we behaved during the COVID crisis. I hesitate to speak against any individual medical providers. Most of them were just as duped as the rest of us. We're now finding that the advice that was coming out of CDC and NIH and all of those was patently false. And there's firm proof to demonstrate that. But even these, again, otherwise trustworthy entities in our life, like our personal doctor, aren't quite as trustworthy as, not because they don't want to be, but they are subject to the same kind of false information as everybody else. This puts a tremendous pressure on all of us. So you say, well, where can I go? You know, who can I trust? Well, you can trust the scriptures. You can trust your own ability to think and the world around you, the natural law. And then from that point on, then you start to be very critical, in a good sense of that word, of those that are giving you information. We need to think really for ourselves, and if something doesn't seem like it quite adds up, to ask enough questions to either, wind up believing what we're told, or to hold it as in question. Okay, so continuing from pre-K through university, our schools are seen as soft targets that often offer great payback as young minds indoctrinated into this alien view of reality and the human person prove to be very difficult to change later in life. You know that. What a child learns early in life, by the time they're in kindergarten, most of their view of the world is already fixed. It's not that you can't change anything, but it's very difficult after that point. And certainly by the time they get through elementary or secondary education, if they've been fed a steady diet of a worldview like that of Wokeism, they will not have the capacity to think clearly. Certainly not to think biblically, unless they've, with great intention, been schooled in Scripture.
That's why Hitler targeted the youth.
Yeah, look at every tyrant in history, and they target the children first. As it says here, it's a soft target. We trust teachers, and by and large, they are trustworthy, but the system in which they work is absolutely untrustworthy. And of course, it's exacerbated by other outside influences that find their way in through teachers' unions and that sort of thing. Virginia?
Yeah, I haven't asked Sean Martin recently, but where does it stand? Do you know where it stands, where our Lutheran teachers are being required to go through some of these classes in order to retain their licensing in Minnesota?
I'll get to that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, and then finally the last paragraph there. Therefore, those who are intent on converting and subverting the nation and our culture are continually attempting to infuse the above four elements of critical theory into our public education system. and through it into our children and the entire culture. To do so, a multi-pronged strategy has been developed and is being employed. And the next page shows you how pervasive this effort is to force us into woke forms of thinking.
The 4 elements specifically are, just make sure I have those right, are what here?
In that second resource that I gave you, the philosophical, the Bishop Barron thing, it's the 4 that we went through.
Everywhere.
Yes, that's the one.
This one has a number in this one.
Right
here.
So I didn't say this specifically, but what I'm giving you here and now is about at least 4 hours worth of stuff in an hour and a half or thereabouts. So I apologize for having to jump over things like that and not be repetitively repeating these things. But still, it's important that you get the basics. Okay, so on the next page then, up at the top, is the question, how is this new religion, that is critical theory, being infused into our educational system? And it's happening at multiple levels. And what I try to do is break those levels down for you. First of all, it's coming our way via the federal government. Perhaps some of you remember the Dear Colleague letter that was put out during the Obama administration, in which it basically told every school system, public school system in the nation, that henceforth they would accept transgenderism as a legitimate thing and they would act accordingly. So, for example, if some child who is a girl claimed to be a boy, didn't matter, the child was, or the school system was required to treat them as though they were a boy. And it threatened school districts with removal of money and other things like that. So it was coming directly, in this case, from the president through the Education Department, Federal Department of Education, and also through the Federal Department of Health. Is it still HEW? Seems like it's a different acronym now. But it was coming directly to individual schools and school districts from the feds. Letter B, the federal government also is very active in using the bureaucracy to produce new rules that have the effect of law. One of the big things in front of the Supreme Court this session will be the question, can agencies of the government continue to produce new rules which have the effect of law when legislatures haven't given their approval to it? In recent years, recent decades, that has been more and more the case. Both on the state level and on the federal level, these bureaucratic agencies act as though they are their own judge, jury, their own legislature, and the judicial system has given them permission to do that. That may change. If it does, it'll be a wonderful thing. We also know that through the federal judiciary, there have been a number of different judicial decisions that have been very detrimental. The Obergefell decision, which established same-sex marriage, again, thereby setting aside physical reality and making it a part of government belief that physical reality no longer is meaningful the way it was before. Bostock is another one. Jack Phillips, you maybe remember him. He's the cake decorator. I don't have time to go into all of these, but through the judicial system, we've had a lot of this kind of thing. And then the federal legislative bodies, House and Senate, there are there's a new effort to pass the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment. And some of you may recall that from back in the 70s. It was a big, hairy deal back then. And it came close to being ratified by enough states, but it was not in the end. The time limit to do that expired, but now it's being brought back in even a more insidious form. So that's depending on how the elections go. This will either move forward or it won't. The same thing is true for this misnomer of an act called the Respect for Marriage Act, which would in effect destroy the institution of marriage. So all that's operating on the federal level. Now, when you move down to the state level, you find, first of all, the state legislature. When they are in session, they just love to meddle. They love to micromanage the school systems. So, for example, last year, there was passed a requirement that all public schools have what they call an ethnic studies program. It did not, in the end, it did not require any specific course for graduating. However, the legislation did say that the ideas where you, again, it's this whole constellation of woke ideas, has to be infused in every class at every grade level, even though there's no specific class that a person has to have in order to graduate. So that's now a fact for us here in Minnesota.
It's like them teaching religion in their public schools.
Well, sure. I mean, from our point of view, and we think rightly so, this is a religious system that we now are telling our teachers they must teach the elements of that, even though they would be they would never say that they're teaching critical theory or wokeism, but all the elements are there. Letter B, last year there was passed in the legislature what's called as the conversion therapy ban, so that now Minnesota restricts the speech of all licensed therapists, preventing them from offering help in reducing either same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, where you're confused between male and female. Now, if a licensed counselor offers to, responds to a request by a minor, somebody under 18, responds to a request to help them lessen either their same-sex attraction or their confusion over what sex they are, that counselor will be liable to professional sanctions and very likely losing their license. Now, on the other hand, if that same minor comes to the counselor and says, I want to be aided in, and I want to be more attracted to persons of the same sex, or I want help in making the mental adjustment to a different sex, that is perfectly legal. In fact, it's encouraged. It sounds preposterous, doesn't it? Yes.
This gets back into kids coming from other states as well. That was one of the things that you had to jump over for time reasons, and my apology. But can you want to explain that for me?
So if someone comes, let's say from South Dakota, or there are quite a few states now, I want to say maybe 25, in which the idea of sexual dysphoria, this confusion between male and female, where it is illegal now for a school system to get involved in that issue at all. And certainly when it comes to any medical treatments that might spin off that, or surgeries, it's become illegal. However, let's just say I believe that's true in South Dakota. But if a person, a minor, steps over the line again from South Dakota into Minnesota, now all of a sudden all the powers of the state are going to be employed in just the opposite direction. The state will protect that minor. If their parents try to get them back, they will help resist that. They will not participate in any kind of, again, extradition, or if there are legal documents that another state needs in order to enforce their own laws, we will not cooperate with that. And so we take not just a neutral position to this, we are absolutely antagonistic toward other states. Okay, letter C, legislative action this year requires public schools to stock menstrual products in boys' bathrooms. Obviously, a complete denial of physical realities, but that's what our public schools operate under this year, now. Okay, so that's how, a few examples of how the legislature gets involved in this, in promoting a woke view of life. But you also have the bureaucratic agencies, including the Minnesota Department of Education. And that, they have, oh my goodness, it's almost time.
You have till 12:30.
Oh, I do. Do I have till 12:30?
Your sister told me.
Oh.
Otherwise, I would have yelled it out. I was waiting till 12 to tell you.
I better get that recorded. Not that I don't trust you. All right. So the Department of Education has a number of different mechanisms to make sure they know what is being taught in classrooms here in Minnesota. One of the ways to make sure that they have control over the content of education is by implementing what are called content standards, various academic content standards. And the one that has been of particular interest has been the content standards related to the social sciences. It was just 2 weeks ago that a judge finally signed off on all of the new social studies standards here in Minnesota. And when you dive into them, and by the way, this other resource that I'm not going to get to will give you a lot of the specifics of this. Just what is it that the Minnesota Department of Education wants to make sure that your children are taught. After going through many, many bureaucratic hurdles, after having received thousands of pieces of input from citizens saying, we don't like what's being proposed because the proposal is nothing but woke theory translated into daily lesson plans. So in the end, this is one way that they force teachers to teach even things that they themselves don't believe, but they are required to do so by these standards. Now, a second way, well, I guess I may as well take it in this order. Letter B, Minnesota Department of Education also actively promotes the adoption of something called social emotional learning. And on this count, it targets also our parochial schools. Dan, I imagine you've had some familiarity with this. In fact, there's a version of this called Frenzy that is specifically designed for religious schools, parochial schools. It is the most enticing kind of program. Most teachers, if you ask them these days, will tell you that the children that they are asked to educate bring with them just a whole host of behavioral issues, much more so than was true a generation ago, even 10 years ago. And so many teachers are at their wits' end to try and figure out how to serve these children best, to meet their social and emotional needs. That all of that used to, by and large, used to be taken care of within the family, within the church, within all of these other mediating organizations in society. But that's not happening to the same degree that it used to, and therefore it becomes an expectation of the schools to supply what parents used to do. Except that teachers are not parents. Teachers perform a unique function that is very different than that of parents, and parents perform a function very different than that of teachers. But the suggestion is made through these socially emotional learning programs that they are interchangeable. And therefore, the teacher is justified in spending significant amounts of class time eliciting emotional information about their students' emotional state of mind and trying to develop ways of coping with that, which sounds great. And in the right context, it could be great. But it also means that for every minute that you are spending doing that, you are not engaged in some kind of academic teaching, the 3 R's kind of thing. Now, I think this is still somewhat controversial within our schools. Okay.
I would say, Lutheran schools are a lot different because with SEL, if you will, character development, working in those areas, it's a clear integration of the faith first and foremost is how we want to deal with that. And speaking with my colleagues at other schools, that's how they're doing that as well.
So there are ways of responding to this need that do fall within our Christian understanding, our view of the world, but there are lots of ways that do not. And it's very difficult to sort those things out. I guess I wouldn't be so skeptical of these, except when you hear all the other ways in which the state is trying to manipulate the way children think. And when you take it in totality, you tend to say, anything that the state is suggesting that I do, I'm going to be very skeptical whether it is what it actually says it is. So that's social emotional learning. There's another, and it's not listed here, but the other way in which the state controls what is the content that is taught to children is through the teacher licensing process. So anybody that wants to teach in a public school in Minnesota needs to have a Minnesota State teaching license. Is that required here formally or not?
We, like all of our teachers, to be licensed, if I can say that. The good thing right now is with our accreditation, the National Lutheran School Accreditation, how we are viewed and we're able to work a little differently with that. We do have our teachers try to get
be accredited in some.
Yeah, we're an accredited school, and we do want our teachers to be licensed.
Okay,
but
so
realize that some of these issues are going on.
Yeah, right. So in one way or another, it is a good thing to have professional standards and to try to encourage all of our teachers to live up to those standards. However, specifically the state of Minnesota licensing program now incorporates, again, all the elements of wokeism in that teacher training curriculum. Before a new student, a new teacher coming out of a teacher training program, before the state will license them, they have to essentially say that they buy into all of these woke standards. Now, who does the actual examination of them? Well, it's actually the colleges, their colleges of education. The state requires them to make sure that these things are incorporated in their teacher training program. And that applies to all teacher training, whether that's in secular universities, University of Minnesota, Winona State, wherever, but also applies to all, any religious university that wants to be able to have their graduates certified by the state. And so we have places like Concordia St. Paul, Bethany College, Martin Luther College, all of which have large teacher training colleges. And the state now, this is in effect, the state tells them what they have to teach their prospective teachers. And many of those elements are, again, these woke concepts. So if you have somebody coming out of a teacher training program, this would probably be in effect next year. Either that teacher will in fact agree with these woke concepts and certify that, or they will lie. Okay? Either way is a problem. And if the college says we will not teach these, they will simply no longer be offered the opportunity to give their graduates a teaching license. So one way or another, either in the way teachers are trained and the licensing system, or the content standards that are set out, all of them line up in the same way. That is, they will promote these woke concepts. You get the feeling that the walls are closing in. Okay?
Yeah, that's a bad word.
Oh.
Walls.
Was there any? Yes.
No, I'm just amazed. I don't know how it could have possibly reached 88 and practiced law for 6 years, and I didn't have any of this wonderful stuff. How can I, it doesn't, sometimes I read this and I think, God help us.
I say that frequently.
Yes.
So, I mean, one thing you have to understand is because they are so expert at deploying the language in a way that is not, they don't use words in the same way that you and I typically use words. And so therefore, you can have these standards. I don't have time to read them to you right now, but to most of us they would sound pretty good. And I could say, well, that's a little bit of an odd use of the language, but that doesn't sound bad. But the meaning that has been infused into these words is very objectionable. But you'd never know it unless you study these things, and that really is what this resource, if you want to know the details, I point you in this direction. You'll see that this was produced by the Center for Apologetics and Worldview. This comes out of the Evangelical Lutheran Synod, the ELS Synod, the same one that runs Bethany College and Seminary. The chief author of this was Ryan McPherson. Maybe some of you come across him before. He's unfortunately he's not at Bethany anymore. He's helping to develop a new Lutheran college in Wyoming. Can't give you the exact name. But
Luther Classical College.
What was that?
Luther Classical.
Luther Classical College. WCC? No, LCC. So at any rate, you have to be a student of language in order to understand these. So your normal practice of law, Paul, you would be just as easily duped as anybody else because the language has been perverted, twisted. And yet, ultimately, the judges that will have to enforce these laws, they've been well, they understand. And
I think you ought to send all your articles every week there to all the state legislators.
Well, we do have a, what we might call an LCMS or a Lutheran caucus. I'm not sure what the count will be this coming year, but we've had 9 legislators that we do meet with to flag certain pieces of legislation and indicate to them why we as the church find them concerning. So we do try to go directly to them. Now, do we do it as effectively as we should? I'm sure not. But typically, legislators they're happy to get this input, because otherwise all they receive are the inputs from those that have a bias, and those that have the money, which is typically the teachers' unions, similar organizations. Okay. Then the other level at which state government works against you is through the governor's office. Of course, our current governor, Governor Walz, is a Democrat, but he's not just a run-of-the-mill Democrat. He is the one that is absolutely opposed to anything other than what the teachers' union suggests. And so until the governor's seat is occupied by somebody else, the organization that promotes school choice and openness, it's called OAK, Opportunity for All Kids. Until there is a different occupant of the governor's mansion, we're going to be severely limited. But one of the ways in which the governor has tried to do that is in his appointment process. So, for example, the committee called PELSB, by short, the Professional Licensing, Education Licensing Standards, something, board. He appoints all the members of that. And as you might guess, it's a stacked deck. And so even though there is a procedure that would make you think that maybe more balanced kinds of views would be represented, that's not the case, because of course all the individuals making the decisions are of the same mindset.
Is his wife still, she's not currently the president of the teachers union?
No, his wife was an official of the Minnesota, Education Minnesota.
Isn't that a conflict of interest?
You'd think maybe. Yeah. All right. I should also say, with regard to teacher licensing, so far I've given the impression that the only place in which the state will apply pressure to teachers to develop a certain mindset is when they're first coming into the profession. However, teachers, if they wish to remain licensed, Minnesota licensed, they have to have certain training and every 5 years be recertified. And in that recertification process, there's also embedded these same kinds of concepts. If you wonder why we have such a teacher shortage in Minnesota, well, this is why. Because here you have veteran teachers who presumably grew up with a worldview that was probably more like ours, and to the degree that they are forced to deny that worldview, they're simply saying, I'm unwilling to do that, I will leave the profession. And so not surprisingly, we do have a number of previously state licensed public school teachers that are now knocking on the doors of our schools asking if we might have a place for them. It's an encouraging thing, but it's also a challenge, because whether they understand it or not, they bring with them a certain frame of mind that it simply takes time to assure us and parents that we're continuing Lutheran education in the same tradition that it's always been. All right, so they've got all the teachers in a vice, those new ones and those old ones. They've got the licensing, the content standards, pretty well sewn up. There isn't much place to go if you are in disagreement with that, if you want to participate in public education. Okay, then the last thing, number 5, parents are often being systematically excluded. Often they are kept unaware of the new content in education. Sometimes specific policies are adopted by school districts to prevent parent access to general information about the curriculum being taught and specific information about their own child's matters regarding sexuality or transsexuality. Rather than treating parents as the primary authority in the life of their children, as they are, frequently they are viewed as and treated as obstacles to the school's attempt as an agent of the state to claim the primary authority over the life of kids. So, this is one of the really hopeful places. More and more parents are becoming aware that they are being excluded, systematically excluded, not by accident, but by design. And these are the folks that are showing up on Dan's doorstep saying, you know, there's something I just don't like anymore. You got some room for my kid? And he either does or doesn't. But if he does, then we have a parent, we have an opportunity to give them the words and the concepts to explain why they feel uncomfortable. But that takes a lot of effort, and classroom teachers are already, more than full-time in what they do. So it falls on all of us then to try and give people the concepts, give them the framework to think about this so that they can start to be more alert, start to find more accurate sources of information other than the mainstream media, so that they really are informed about what how the world is now and how it is in fact stacked against them. Now, on that count, the most hopeful thing coming down the pike is something called education savings accounts. So we in Minnesota know virtually nothing about them, while they are currently operating in at least 10 different states. It's a simple concept. In the past, the money that the state collects for the education of all of our children, that money is taken by the legislature and divvied up, and so much is given to each child. Now, in the past, that money has always gone directly from the state to the school district that the child's parent or the child has chosen. No options. Now, in 10 states, there are options. The parent now has the option to say to the state, state, I relieve you of the responsibility of educating my child. In return, I want the money that you have allocated for my child. I want it to come to me. I will have complete control over it, and I will use it to be then the purchaser of educational services for my child. I stipulate that I cannot use that money to take a vacation or some inappropriate use, and the state has mechanisms to make sure that that is the case. And so parents now become empowered financially to choose. And this is happening.
Does that include homeschooling?
In some states it includes homeschool, and in some states it does not. Homeschooling is a stickier wicket because, of course, the person that is providing the educational service is typically the parent. And so you have a system where some would say there's an opportunity for mischief there. Having said that, though, more and more of the systems are including homeschooling. So then, all of a sudden, you have, as in Iowa, for example, they just started that this year, the parents in Iowa have that ability. They will get $8,000 a year, whatever the state's allocation is, for every student every year. And then the parent goes out and purchases educational resources. Most often, that means paying the tuition at a different school. But it can include many other things as well. But in the end, it signals to everybody in the society that the primary authority in the life of a child is their parent, not the state. That is the critical insight that everybody should carry away from this. And this is not only good for parents who want to leave the public system but have not been financially able to do that. This also applies equally to those who are within the public system but who want a better public system, one that is more responsive to the concerns of parents. Both type of parents benefits equally from this system. The new catchphrase is this: when parents have a choice, they have a voice. Okay? When they have a choice, a financial choice, it is then and only then that they truly have a voice, particularly in the public school setting. Right now, most people are a captive audience to the public school system. Most people do not have the financial wherewithal to pay their taxes for public education and then pay again for their education in another setting. So this is coming like a freight train across the United States. Again, we don't hear anything about it because news like this is controlled. But there will be more states like this next year. I want to say 9 of the 10, maybe 8 of the 10 that have this program came in the last year. So you see the degree of momentum that there is behind this. And it's popular. When they poll people, whether Democrats, Independents, Republicans, all of them have very large percentages of people that like this system. Among Republicans, it's probably up in the 85% range. You don't find 85% approval of anything in the public world. You do on this. For independent, it's probably more like 75, but even for Democrats, it's up in the 65% range. They recognize it as a basic matter of fairness, where the government should not be engaged in promoting a religious view of life that conflicts with their own. So, what does that mean to us? Well, in Minnesota, it means we have a longer road ahead of us. We have an organization, I called it before, the Opportunity for All Kids, OAK. And we've been fighting for a long time. And we have a good organization. To be honest, we need more money. But this is where we can have an impact. Because as soon as you give people an honest choice, then all of a sudden the mischief that goes on in the legislature, the mischief that goes on in the Department of Education, all of that goes away. Because they know people will not stand for it. And they have the means to register their objection. Yes?
But with this ESA, does that come through the government then? Is that a state? The legislature would have to bring that forward?
Yes. So there is a proposal that was introduced last year, and will be introduced again this year by our organization to bring this into being. It will be supported by virtually all Republicans. It will be opposed by, in all likelihood, all Democrats. And we will sit and look at each other again.
But a couple of years ago, you had the Democrats that did agree to it.
We were very close 5-6 years ago. We were within an eyelash of getting this kind of school choice program. The governor, Dayton at that time, had agreed to it. The language had been sent off to the printer, and then somebody from Education Minnesota called Governor Dayton, and it was done. Post. It's not as though it can't happen here. It can. But, you know, elections are important. And if we flip one of the bodies, if the Senate goes back to Republican control, then all of a sudden we live in a different world again. And certainly if the governor's office is changed. So there are reasons for optimism. The greatest of which, of course, is that God's in control and we understand where truth resides and so forth. But there's also room for optimism on the human plane that in fact this is going to happen. It will happen here in Minnesota. I can guarantee it. But whether it happens in 2 years or 10 years, I don't know. But question?
My son-in-law is a teacher in Chanhassen.
Okay.
And the money does go to the district for each child.
Right.
Well, now they're transporting some children from Minneapolis into his school, so their district would get the money. And he's got his hands full with these problem children. And so I hope Minnesota gets this new thing.
One of the really hopeful things is that parents who have typically thought of themselves as public school parents, who really like the idea of a public school system and really want their children to be in that, they are starting to recognize the degree to which they have been taken for granted and abused. And as they become more and more aware of that, the momentum, political momentum in the state will pick up even further than it is now. So typically, it's what happens over the kitchen table. You know, when you have a chance to sit with your neighbor who doesn't know anything about what an ESA is, Education Savings Account, and you tell them, and their eyes get about this big, you know, really? You can do that? That's how this changes. I'd like to say we have a $2 million ad budget that Oak has access to, and we can put this on the airwaves and convince everybody that way, but right now that's not possible. All right, so there's hope. Okay, there's always hope, lots of it. And we of all people should be optimistic people. Any other questions?
Yeah, this end-of-life options that is will be presented to the legislatures. What are the
Okay, so
chances?
this is the act that was just introduced, and we just had a committee hearing on it 2 days ago. It passed out of that committee, not surprisingly, because it was controlled by the left. But the hopeful sign is that in the Senate, we believe we have at least one DFL senator that will not vote for this. And that would be enough to kill it. Having said that, we know that last year, people who wouldn't vote for a certain thing normally did. So but there's reason to think that we can stop this, particularly if we let our legislators know how important it is. All right, well, thank you for sitting so patiently. If you want to be in touch with me, go again on the Minnesota South District website, and you can get in touch with me that way. Paul?
Thank you very, very much for what you're doing. The articles you put out in the from LCMS, and I'm glad that somebody's on top of it and watching the legislation. It's like this pedophiles and something. This stuff is absolutely amazing. I mean, I can't believe what those people down St. Paul do. Are they all idiots?
Oh, we don't live in.
No, the two I know. Wow. Well, thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, if you're interested, again, go to the website. That's how you get my mailings, and that's how you contact me if you want to write that $500,000 check to Hope. Because not that size, but that's what it's going to take. We need resources from ordinary people to make this happen. All right, blessings.